Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive mountain man says no to a powerful HOA's bizarre request, he unknowingly ignites a war for his land, freedom, and sanity. Drones, break-ins, forged documents, and one stubborn homeowner who won't back down. This isn't a dispute, it's a siege. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp mountain air that hits you square in the lungs when you step out barefoot onto a cold wooden porch. I had just let out Moose, my 90-pound mutt with the soul of a bouncer, and was sipping my second coffee while watching steam rise off the pines. It was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get when you live above elevation, off-grid adjacent, and 2 miles from the nearest HOA bulletin board, which is exactly how I liked it. I bought this cabin back in 2019. It used to belong to an old forest ranger and his wife, lovely folks, salt of the earth, and not the HOA type. I gutted the place over 2 years and rebuilt it from the studs with my own hands and too much money. Now, it's home. My kingdom of silence, sanity, and 6-inch thick insulation. And, most importantly, it sits outside the jurisdiction of Bristle Pines Estates, that Stepford neighborhood down the ridge, run by vinyl-sided tyrants in yoga pants and Teslas. So, when a black Escalade rolled up my gravel path that morning, uninvited and definitely unannounced, I already had a feeling something unpleasant was about to crawl out of it. The doors opened like a synchronized maneuver. Out stepped 2 men in matching navy blue blazers and a woman in high heels that weren't made for my terrain. They looked absurd standing there, shiny shoes sinking into pine needles, trying to maintain corporate posture while a squirrel chattered at them from my roof. "Good morning, Mr. Pearson," the taller man asked with a salesman's smile. I didn't answer immediately, just nodded and took another sip. Moose had trotted up beside me by now, tail stiff and ears up. Good boy. They introduced themselves, flashing shiny HOA badges as if I should be impressed. I noticed the woman held a sleek leather folder like it was a holy text. They informed me, politely, with the kind of fake calm you use on unstable people or wild animals, that they were part of the Bristle Pines Estates Homeowners Association Welcome and Development Committee, which already sounded like a cult. Karen Strongwell, the president, hadn't come herself. Of course she hadn't. She'd sent her disciples. They got to the point quickly. "There's going to be an event here in 2 weeks," one of them said. "A coordinated initiative to welcome state officials and private investors to Bristle Pines. It's part of our new Harmony in the Heights outreach campaign." I blinked. "Okay," I said slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Well," the woman chimed in, flipping open the folder to reveal a glossy mock-up brochure. "We'd like to feature your property as a model of integrated eco-luxury. It aligns beautifully with the image we're presenting. Rustic charm meets modern sustainability. It's practically the crown jewel of the area." The guy added, "Your home is ideal for this. Truly. We'd only need access for 2 weeks. Just enough time to prepare and host viewings. You'd be compensated, of course, and the board would be deeply grateful." I stared at them. "You want me to leave my own house," I said, "for 2 weeks, so you can parade a bunch of donors and bureaucrats through it like it's a real estate timeshare?" There was a beat of silence. Then the woman said, "We'd also ask that you remove any personal items, books, clothing, firearms, for presentation purposes, just temporarily. We'll provide professional storage and security." Moose growled. I didn't. I just laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh or an uncomfortable one. It was the full-body kind that makes your coffee spill and your neighbors squirm. I set the mug down on the railing, wiped my hand on my jeans, and said flatly, "No." They looked confused. Maybe they weren't used to being refused. HOA folk usually thrive in environments where people say yes to avoid fines and passive-aggressive newsletters. "My property is not part of your HOA," I added. "Never has been, never will be. And I don't care if Karen Strongwell wants to host the governor and Beyoncé. You're not getting so much as a shed." They exchanged glances. The tall one tried again, this time with that faint edge of threat, hidden under professional tone. "Mr. Pearson, while we understand your independence, we've been expanding our delegated service zone to encompass adjacent parcels. In fact, the board has voted to include your area in a preliminary engagement footprint. It's non-binding for now, but—" "You're expanding your what?" "Delegated service zone," he said, as if that meant something in the real world. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you just made that up in the car ride over. He cleared his throat. We're simply asking for cooperation in exchange for financial incentives, marketing exposure, and community alignment. I live in the woods, I replied. I don't want exposure. I want trees and silence. They realized they weren't getting anywhere. The woman closed her folder, the man gave a tight smile, and the third guy, who hadn't said a word the entire time, just nodded politely. That one lingered a second longer, looking not at me but at the porch, the cameras, the dog. Thank you for your time, they said, like they were ending a sales pitch, not walking away from the dumbest request I'd heard since a bear tried to open my hot tub. As they walked back to the SUV, I called out cheerfully, "Tell Karen next time she wants to steal someone's house, she should come herself." They didn't respond. Later that day, I posted the whole thing on my blog, titled it, "My House is Not a Showroom, Get Off My Ridge." A few friends from the legal world shared it. A few thousand strangers liked it. One lawyer emailed me just to say, "Jesus Christ, what is wrong with these people?" I didn't have an answer, but I had a feeling this wasn't over. 3 days later, I found tire tracks behind my house. It had snowed lightly the night before, just enough to leave a thin powder across the back road that curves near my utility shed and loops into the tree line. I hadn't driven that way in over a week. No deliveries, no visitors. Yet there they were, 2 deep, deliberate sets of tire marks leading up the hill and curling toward my rear gate, the one I keep locked with a steel chain and, up until now, untouched. Moose sniffed the tracks and let out a low, guttural growl, the kind that usually means, "I don't like this" in dog language. I agreed. I walked the line carefully, following the imprint to where the tires stopped. There were faint boot prints near the gate. Someone had gotten out, tried the lock, then circled back. No sign of entry, no damage, just a failed attempt. Still, it felt too calculated, like a dry run. Back inside, I pulled up the footage from the trail cam I'd mounted near the woodshed. Sure enough, at around 2 in the morning, 2 figures appeared in infrared, hooded, moving low, flashlights off. One went straight for the gate, rattled the chain, then turned to say something to the other. Moose had likely scared them off with his bark, because seconds later, both were retreating fast. I saved the clip and emailed it to Daryl, my attorney. Then I made myself another pot of coffee because, apparently, no wasn't an answer they were willing to accept. That afternoon, I checked the mailbox at the foot of my drive and found a thick envelope inside. No return address, just Bristle Pines Community Services Office printed in that nauseating faux elegant font they use for HOA announcements. Inside was a printed Notice of Scheduled Access Authorization. According to this masterpiece of corporate delusion, my property had been pre-registered as a temporary hosting site for an eco-aesthetic pilot display during the upcoming Investor Summit. The document stated that per Article 6 of the Bristle Pines Extended Engagement Charter, I was now considered a provisional participant in the Community Development Initiative. It even had a section that said I was required to ensure the home is vacant and available for staging no later than March 12th. No signature, no seal. Just a line at the bottom saying, "Failure to comply may result in civil escalation measures as determined by the Executive Committee." I laughed. Then I actually read the damn thing again. And stopped laughing. Tucked into the back was a single-page minutes summary of a supposed HOA board meeting. My name was listed as present. The line read, "Zachary Pearson agreed in principle to temporary staging, pending logistical clarification." I'd never been to a single meeting, not one. And if I had, I'd remember agreeing to let strangers fondle my furniture and breathe on my pillows. I texted Daryl. They forged a board meeting record with my name on it. His reply came in under a minute. Send me scanned copy. Don't respond to them. This just crossed into criminal territory. That night, I pulled every camera feed I had and backed it all up to external drives. Then I spent 2 hours installing new sensors along the back perimeter. The motion detectors near the shed were old-school infrared. They'd worked for years, but now I added a pressure mat near the gate and a secondary sensor aimed at the tree line. Moose didn't like the latter, but he supervised loyally while I rigged a wireless signal booster up on the chimney. Now, any break-in attempt would alert both me and the local sheriff's department. Later that evening, while reviewing my security network, I noticed a new motion ping on the southern path. It was subtle, too far to see clearly, but the camera caught something glinting in the moonlight. A drone. A small quadcopter hovered near the porch roof for about 30 seconds before zipping back toward the valley. I couldn't tell where it came from, but it wasn't Amazon, and it damn sure wasn't my neighbor's kid, unless he'd gotten into industrial surveillance. The next morning, I found the drone again, or what was left of it. It had returned, probably on an automated route, and Moose had knocked it out of the air with a leaping snap of his jaw, like it was a flying chew toy. The remains were scattered across the yard, cracked rotors, busted camera lens, and a tiny memory card buried in the snow. I picked it up, bagged it, and took it inside. One of the rotors had a sticker, BPE Survey Unit. Bristle Pines Estates again. These people had the audacity to send reconnaissance tech to my home, like they were preparing for a military annexation. I drove the busted drone and the fake HOA document down to Daryl's office. He met me at the door, took one look at the gear, and muttered, "Jesus, these people are out of their minds." By the end of the meeting, he'd drafted a cease and desist with an accompanying packet of legal documentation, property boundary maps, title records, and state zoning definitions, all clearly stating that my land was private, unaffiliated, and legally outside the Bristle Pines HOA authority. He added a cover letter with one sentence in bold. Any further attempts to misrepresent ownership or jurisdiction will be met with criminal and civil litigation without further notice. I was still pissed when I got home, but I'll admit, I slept. With the shotgun a little closer to the bed that night. It happened at 2:48 in the goddamn morning. I remember the exact time because my alarm system screamed me awake like a banshee. And when you live in the woods with no neighbors close enough to hear a chainsaw, that kind of noise doesn't just startle you. It sends your adrenal glands into overdrive. Moose was already off the bed and barking like a man possessed. I grabbed the Mossberg from under the frame, not paranoia, just standard practice out here, and rushed toward the entry hall. The motion sensor lights outside had already lit up the porch and driveway, but the alert hadn't come from the front. It came from the side, the mudroom entrance, where I kept the utility panel, extra coats, and a perfectly boring window I never thought anyone would be dumb enough to target. I stayed low, weapon leveled, and peeked through the edge of the blinds. There they were, two men dressed in black, one crouched by the side door, working at the lock with what looked like a tension wrench and pick, the other keeping lookout and holding some kind of crowbar or multi-tool. They hadn't seen me yet. I opened the front door quietly and circled around the porch in socks, stepping as silently as I could across the cold boards. I rounded the corner fast. "Drop it! Hands where I can see them!" They froze. The guy with the crowbar actually flinched hard enough to drop it. The other stood up slowly, eyes wide. For a moment, nobody moved, just the sound of Moose growling behind the screen door and the wind rattling through the trees. I said down on the ground, "Now?" To their credit, they didn't try to run. I think the 12 gauge pointed at the center of mass tends to discourage bad decisions. I held them there and used my foot to kick away the tools. Then I called the sheriff's office on speaker, told them I had 2 intruders at gunpoint, and that if they didn't come quickly, well, I didn't finish the sentence. Deputies arrived in under 15 minutes, a record around here, and found me holding 2 grown men at gunpoint in pajama pants and thermal socks. One of the officers took over, ordering them to the ground, cuffing both without a word of protest. The kicker, one of them, the one with the tools, had an HOA contractor badge hanging from his jacket. It was laminated, official-looking, complete with the Bristle Pines Estates logo and a very clean signature at the bottom. I asked to see it up close, and there it was. Karen Strongwell, in bold, loopy penmanship under the words Temporary Access Contractor Authorization. I barked a laugh and handed it to the deputy. The men started talking as soon as they were seated in the back of the cruiser. They claimed this was authorized access, part of a scheduled staging prep. One of them even had the nerve to say they were trying to meet a timeline set by the board. I gave my statement to the deputies, showed them the security footage, the prior drone incident, the forged notice I'd received. They looked increasingly uncomfortable the more they saw. One of the deputies, an older guy named Reeves I'd seen around town, pulled me aside and said, "Between you and me, they've been stepping on a lot of toes lately. HOA used to stick to fences and paint color complaints. Now they think they're City Hall." "Trying to break into my house isn't a code violation," I replied. "It's a felony." He nodded grimly. They hauled the 2 guys off and said detectives would be in touch. I stood there in the cold until the last tail light disappeared behind the trees. then went inside and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands still shaking slightly. By 7 that morning, it was already in motion. HOA released an official statement on their website titled, "Miscommunication leads to unauthorized contractor action." The wording was a masterclass in weaseling, blaming subcontractors, vague scheduling misalignment, and reiterating that the community remained committed to positive neighbor relations and transparency. They didn't mention my name, of course, or the fact that their people had tried to pick my lock in the middle of the night. I sent the article to Daryl, who replied instantly, "This is the beginning. Keep everything." We're going full escalation mode. Later that day, I got a visit from a local reporter who'd picked up the police scanner chatter. Young guy, wide-eyed, probably fresh out of journalism school. He asked if I'd be willing to talk. Off the record, I said. He nodded, so I gave him the full rundown, showed him the fake HOA document, the drone wreckage, the contractor badge. I watched his expression shift from curious to incredulous to outright disturbed. I thought HOA stuff was just, annoying letters about lawn care, he muttered. Not out here, I said. Out here, they think they own the mountains. That night, I wrote a new blog post titled, "When HOA Sends Burglars Instead of Emails." It blew up. The comments ranged from outrage to disbelief to full-blown legal nerds dissecting municipal overreach and private land rights. I even got a message from a retired judge who called it a fascinating example of extrajudicial arrogance. Still, the part that kept replaying in my head was the look on the second guy's face. The quiet one. The one who hadn't said a word, even when cuffed. Something about him wasn't right, like he knew more than he let on. And he wasn't scared. Daryl called me 3 days later with a tone in his voice that made me sit down before he even said the words. "You're not going to like this," he said. "Too late for that," I replied. "What now? They installing a toll booth on my driveway?" He didn't laugh. "I got a copy of the investor packet Bristlepine sent out for their summit. A source inside the county development office forwarded it. It includes your house. Full color spread, page 6, front and back." My jaw tightened. And they used my house. Photos, address, architectural summary. Hell, they even slapped on an estimated market value and described it as community-aligned Eco-Lux showcase property, maintained under BPE service zone standards. I felt my blood. Pressure spike. I never gave them a damn thing. I know. That's not the worst part. I waited. They included a copy of a temporary agreement signed by you, with your signature, email attachment sent to the county planning committee, dated 2 weeks ago. I stared at the wall for a solid 10 seconds. They forged my signature? Looks like it. That was when I stopped pacing and sat down hard. Moose, sensing the shift, rested his chin on my knee. I reached for my phone with one hand and a bourbon with the other. Daryl continued, "I've already sent it to a forensic document examiner, former FBI. Should have a written report in 48 hours. But I've seen enough of your signature on legal letters to know this is absolute crap." He emailed me a copy. The moment I opened the PDF, my stomach dropped. It was close. Someone had clearly traced or digitally forged a previous signature, but there were slight differences. The Z in Zachary had a loop I never use, and the slant was just wrong. I forwarded it to my own forensic expert for a second opinion. Meanwhile, Daryl started preparing a formal criminal complaint. At this point, we weren't just dealing with trespassing or intimidation. This was document forgery, fraudulent misrepresentation, and misuse of private property for financial gain. The investor booklet wasn't just promotional fluff. It had gone out to multiple grant offices and investment groups. Bristle Pines was actively soliciting money using my property as a centerpiece of their expansion plan. They were trying to profit off my land while simultaneously threatening to sue me for non-compliance. The gall was astronomical. That evening, I posted another update to the blog titled, "Apparently I now work for the HOA." I embedded the investor booklet cover, the page featuring my home, and a giant red caption that read, "Never signed anything, still not a member. Bite me." It exploded. Within 12 hours, it was reposted across homeowners' rights forums, Reddit, and even a libertarian think tank blog. A real estate YouTuber with over 500,000 subscribers emailed me asking for an interview. I told him I'd think about it. Meanwhile, Bristle Pines put out another statement. this one reeking of lawyer sweat and committee compromise. They didn't deny the investor packet. Instead, they claimed clerical errors and said that preliminary template documents were distributed prior to final property access confirmations, which was a long way of saying, "Oops, we lied, but please don't sue." Too late. The next morning, I drove into town to meet Daryl at the courthouse annex. We were filing the formal civil suit, $500,000 for invasion of privacy, fraudulent use of property, emotional distress, attempted misappropriation, and illegal use of architectural images without consent. The clerk at the civil intake desk was a man named Roland I'd met once before, middle-aged, friendly enough, used to dealing with land disputes and petty nuisances, but when he took our paperwork, he looked tense, sweaty, like someone had microwaved him from the inside. He took the folder and muttered, "This one again." I looked at Daryl. He raised an eyebrow. After Roland walked away, I leaned in and said, "What was that about?" Daryl whispered, "You noticed that?" "Yeah." Later that afternoon, he got a call from one of his friends in the county recorder's office. Apparently, someone had attempted to submit a boundary revision request, retroactively designating my parcel as part of Bristle Pines' extended service domain. It had been flagged due to irregularities. The person who submitted it? Karen Strongwell, personally. Even better, there was a record of her meeting with Roland the clerk, in person, twice. The second time, she came alone, brought coffee, and left behind a sealed envelope that no one logged. We didn't have hard proof. Yet. But the implication was clear. She was trying to bribe a public official to alter the land records. Now it wasn't just HOA shenanigans. It was potential felony-level tampering with public records. Daryl's tone that evening was clipped and electric. "We're elevating this. I'm contacting the state attorney general's office and submitting everything. She's not just overreaching. She's running a racket." That night, I poured another drink and sat on my porch looking out at the tree line. It wasn't just about me anymore. This woman was orchestrating a goddamn hostile territorial takeover, and she wasn't even smart enough to hide the fingerprints. Somewhere out there, I had a bad feeling this wasn't even close to the full picture. And something told me that quiet guy, the third one from the first visit, the one who kept his mouth shut, knew exactly what was going on. The first attack was digital. My blog went down around 4 in the morning. I didn't notice until Moose started whining at the back door, and I got up to let him out, checked my phone like a half-awake zombie, and saw 36 unread messages. Friends, readers, even a retired judge from Oregon I'd exchanged property law notes with, all trying to tell me the site had vanished. I checked the admin panel, locked out. By sunrise, my inbox was swamped with fake password reset emails, 2 flagged bank login attempts, and a warning from my DNS provider that someone had filed a takedown notice claiming I was distributing defamatory and misleading real estate. Content, defamation, my own house. Daryl called 15 minutes later. "Someone's trying to scrub your presence, Zach. This is coordinated." I wasn't surprised. I was pissed, but not surprised. Still, it's one thing to get harassed online. What came next proved they were done playing subtle. By noon, someone had dumped 2 full bags of construction debris at the end of my driveway. Broken drywall, insulation, and what looked like smashed cabinetry from a mid-90s kitchen. There was a sticky note taped to a broken plank that just said, "Reuse, redesign, reconnect," a Bristle Pines marketing slogan. Later that day, I found my mailbox had been stuffed with HOA newsletters, hundreds of them. Someone had taken the time to bulk print old newsletters and jam them in until the hinges snapped. I had to pry it open with a crowbar. By dusk, a goddamn firecracker went off in that same broken mailbox. Moose barked so hard he almost knocked over the kitchen chair, and I had to dig charred plastic out of my gravel. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was an attempt to make me crack, force me to fight a war of attrition on every front, digital, legal, and now physical. I drove into town the next day to file another police report. Deputy Reeves raised his eyebrows when I listed it all out. "You sure this is all Bristle Pines?" "No," I said, "but I'm sure it's not the Girl Scouts." He didn't smile. "You might want to consider federal escalation, Zach. This is turning ugly." As if it wasn't already. Daryl agreed. He had already contacted the state attorney general's office, but now he was calling in a few favors at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He told me he'd heard rumors that Bristle Pines had been playing games with federal grant programs, designating properties as community resources to score beautification funding and eco-redevelopment money. Wait, I said. You're telling me they've been using properties they don't own to get HUD money? Exactly, he said. If we prove that your house was included in a federal grant application and that they forged consent documents, it's not just fraud. It's a federal crime. I stared at him. They're applying for grants using my house? Trying to, he said. I've got people pulling documentation, and we're not the only ones watching. I frowned. What does that mean? That quiet guy. From the first visit. The one who didn't talk. Yeah. Daryl leaned back in his chair. His name's Eric Malden. I had him checked. Not on HOA payroll, no company records, but his name pops up on a task force list under a HUD internal program, an anti-corruption probe tied to housing development abuses. I blinked. You're telling me that guy's a federal plant? Daryl smiled thinly. I'm telling you, we've got a mole on the inside. And he just sent me an email. I leaned in. He's been recording meetings. Internal emails. He says Karen's been running a fake expansion initiative using neighboring properties. Yours, a retired veteran's down the ridge, even a family cabin she had condemned as unstable just to flip it. He paused. Eric thinks she's funneled over $300,000 in bogus renovation grants, all tied to properties the HOA doesn't legally control. I sat back and exhaled. Jesus. Yeah, we knew we had to move fast. The longer this dragged, the more damage they'd do. Daryl coordinated with the feds. I prepared for more retaliation, installed another set of cameras, these with solar backup, and buried 2 trail sensors along the ridgeline. I wasn't just documenting now. I was preparing for siege. That weekend, a van showed up on the edge of my lot, unmarked tinted windows. It sat there for over an hour without anyone getting out. I didn't approach, just filmed it from inside, time-stamped the video, and emailed it to Daryl, who forwarded it to the feds. No plates, no movement, just pressure. At night, I'd sit on the porch with Moose curled at my feet, shotgun nearby, waiting for movement in the trees. Sometimes there was none. Sometimes I'd catch the reflection of binoculars in the woods, always gone by the time I stood up. Karen was trying to isolate me, break me, turn my sanctuary into a prison, but I wasn't going anywhere. And with Eric's recordings about to hit the right hands, she was about to learn what happens when you try to bulldoze the wrong cabin. The courthouse smelled like moldy paper and linoleum polish. It always did, but that morning it felt different, heavier, like the walls knew something was coming. I walked in wearing my only clean sport coat, jeans, and boots, with just enough mud on the soles to make a statement. Daryl was already there, sipping burnt lobby coffee and flipping through our case files like a man reviewing enemy troop formations. This is it, he said, not looking up. They try anything today, we bury them. Karen was there too, of course. She came flanked by 2 attorneys and 1 PR assistant who looked like she'd rather be dead than breathing the same air as the rest of us. Karen wore her usual face, Botox calm with undertones of indignation, but this time her eyes gave her away. Too alert, too calculating. She expected a fight. She just didn't know we'd already pulled the pin. The courtroom wasn't packed, but there were enough people. A few reporters, 2 county reps, someone from the zoning office, and, curiously, a sharply dressed man in the back who didn't fit the local crowd. I caught his eye once. He nodded. That was all. The judge, Honorable Lorna Green, was a no-nonsense, military-voiced woman who'd once thrown a developer out of her court for trying to bribe a clerk with Super Bowl tickets. My kind of judge. We started with the civil case. My lawsuit for $500,000 in damages. Karen's lawyers tried to downplay everything. The investor packet. A clerical error. The fake agreement with my signature. A miscommunication between marketing and legal. The attempted break-in. An unfortunate incident involving independent contractors who misunderstood access rights. Green's brow twitched every time they said something dumb. Then it was Daryl's turn. He handed over a thick binder of evidence, labeled and tabbed, and walked the court through it methodically. The fake service zone documents. The forged signature now confirmed by not 1 but 2 forensic handwriting experts. The unauthorized drone surveillance. Photos of the mail tampering and debris dumping. Emails from Bristle Pine's internal servers that Eric, our mole, had provided, detailing the plan to temporarily appropriate unregistered parcels for strategic exposure. Karen didn't blink. Not until Daryl dropped the final envelope on the evidence table. "This," he said, "is a recording." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, what you're about to hear is a conversation between the defendant, Karen Strongwell, and a county clerk by the name of Roland Parker. In it, she offers him a donation, cash, in exchange for quietly updating the land record for my client's property to reflect inclusion in the HOA's jurisdiction." Karen's lawyers immediately objected. The judge waved them down. The audio crackled to life. Karen's voice was unmistakable, calm, charming, offering a little extra for your time, and a way to get this handled without all that paperwork mess. Roland was hesitant. Karen persisted. When the clip ended, the silence was suffocating. The judge sat back slowly, then looked at Karen like she'd just found dog hair in her soup. "This court," she said, "is now referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate review of criminal conduct." Karen's lawyers scrambled. The PR assistant looked like she might puke. But we weren't done. The sharply dressed man in the back stood up, cleared his throat, and introduced himself. James Moreno, Special Investigator, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He walked to the front and requested permission to present supplemental materials to the court. Green allowed it. What followed was the public autopsy of Bristle Pines Estates. Moreno laid it out in precise clinical language. Over $320,000 in misused grant funds. Falsified property use agreements submitted to HUD. At least 4 properties, including mine, used without consent in federal applications. A series of internal HOA emails discussing how to retroactively justify these filings. And most damning of all, Karen's own digital signature on a budget document marked "Approved for HUD Submission, Phase 2 Expansion." The room buzzed like a kicked hornet nest. The judge adjourned for lunch. During recess, Karen tried to play it off, giving a smug little smile to the press. She still believed she could PR her way out of this. That belief shattered 37 minutes later. Court resumed. The district attorney's office, having received the audio and Moreno's documents, made an unprecedented move. They issued an arrest warrant on the spot. Bailiffs walked over and cuffed Karen Strongwell in open court. She tried to object, sputtering about misinterpretations and political motivations, but the judge wasn't having it. "Mrs. Strongwell," she said, "you are being charged with falsifying government documents, attempted bribery of a public official, fraudulent misrepresentation, and conspiracy to misappropriate federal funds." Karen went quiet. Not dignified quiet. Broken quiet. As they led her out, someone in the back clapped once. The judge scowled and banged the gavel. Court adjourned. Outside, reporters swarmed. I ignored most of them. Daryl gave the official statement. I just stood near the courthouse steps, looking at the sunlight and thinking, she actually thought she could steal people's homes and get away with it. She almost did. If it weren't for Eric, if it weren't for cameras, if it weren't for Daryl's stubborn, methodical grind, the war wasn't over, not yet. But this was the first real victory. They called it organizational restructuring. The HOA board didn't even wait for the dust to settle. 2 days after Karen was led out of the courtroom in cuffs, Bristle Pines Estates held an emergency executive session, which, despite the title, was really just 6 terrified committee members panic-eating muffins in a country club basement while a real estate lawyer tried to explain what conspiracy to defraud the federal government actually meant. The headlines were everywhere. Colorado HOA president arrested in federal property fraud scandal. Luxury community caught misusing HUD grants. Man living in mountains says hell no to HOA, wrecks their entire operation. That last one was from a satirical news site, but the comments were gold. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Not while I was still getting letters. Yeah, the day after Karen's arrest, a courier dropped off an envelope with Bristle Pines branding and an absurd wax seal, like we were doing medieval land deals now. Inside was a letter from the Interim Governance Council expressing deep regret over recent misunderstandings and inviting me to enter into a constructive partnership regarding future cooperative development initiatives. Translation: they were still trying to save face, still pretending this could all be resolved amicably, like we were in a bad divorce and not a criminal lawsuit that now had federal oversight. Daryl laughed so hard when he read it, he had to wipe his eyes. Meanwhile, things were unraveling fast for the HOA. Eric, our undercover contact, had passed along more internal memos. Turns out Karen wasn't acting entirely alone. Several board members had signed off on expansion strategy briefings, which, in plain English, meant knowingly targeting non-HOA properties for image control and funding leverage. There were references to optical territory, brand-aligned perimeters, and my personal favorite, undocumented stewardship zones. It was real estate colonization dressed in PR. One board member resigned publicly. 2 others lawyered up. And then came the big one, an audit. The county commissioner's office, under pressure from the AG, launched a full investigation into Bristlepine's use of tax credits and zoning exemptions. Evidently, the HOA had pushed for certain upgrades to be billed as community necessity enhancements, including a $75,000 sauna for the clubhouse and a sculpture garden labeled cultural infrastructure. Eric leaked an email where Karen said, "We can justify the spending if we present the surrounding properties as contributors to shared value perception." That meant my house. Again, I wasn't alone either. Turns out there were at least 5 other property owners on the ridge who'd been similarly targeted. An elderly veteran, a young couple with a toddler, a woman who ran a home-based bakery. All had stories, strange letters, odd visits, maintenance bills for services they'd never ordered. One even said someone had tried to trim her hedges to better reflect community aesthetic standards. We met at a local diner. None of us had ever talked before. Now we were practically a support group. Daryl suggested we form a legal coalition, class action if needed. Everyone agreed, but we didn't just want compensation. We wanted the system dismantled, the bylaws, the charter, the twisted machinery that allowed a handful of suburban royalty to try and annex half a mountain for clout and kickbacks. So we went public, as a group. Interviews, articles, local news segments. One woman from the bakery did a segment with her kid on her hip, holding up HOA invoices like they were Monopoly cards. It hit people hard, regular folks. People tired of being told they didn't own what they'd paid for. The backlash was swift. Property values in Bristol Pines started to drop. Real estate firms quietly paused listings. The HOA's insurance provider dropped them. 3 lawsuits were filed within a week. HOA members, real ones, those poor bastards who thought they were just buying into a quiet, gated neighborhood, started demanding answers. I got a message from one of them. "Wish I'd read your blog before moving here. Now I'm stuck with a mortgage, a lawsuit, and a community newsletter that reads like a death rattle." I told him to keep everything, records, emails, screenshots, because the structure was collapsing. By the end of the week, the Bristol Pines HOA board voted to suspend operations indefinitely. Legally, it was a pause. Practically, it was a white flag. The community clubhouse was padlocked. The official HOA site was replaced with a single sentence, "Under review pending legal matters." Even the damn Instagram account went dark, but my favorite moment came quietly. A black SUV, not the same one as before, but close, drove up to my gate. A man got out, suit, clipboard, polite smile. Said he was from the Emergency HOA Transition Committee and wanted to discuss de-escalation terms. I didn't let him finish, just looked at him through the gate and said, "Tell your committee to go to hell." Moose barked for punctuation. He didn't come back. They asked me to speak at the town hall, not officially, no podium, no ribbon cutting, no handshake from a mayor. Just a Tuesday evening gathering in the same community rec center where 6 months earlier Karen Strongwell had declared my home a shared-use aesthetic asset. Now that room was filled with folding chairs, nervous residents, and the low hum of civic embarrassment. I wasn't interested in speeches, but I was tired of people being afraid of their own damn driveways. So I stood up, said my name, and told the story, not just the flashy parts, not the break-in, the drone, the courthouse drama. I talked about the small stuff, the first knock on my door, the absurdity of being asked to hand over keys to strangers for a property I'd bought outright, the way my mailbox exploded, the way no one in power seemed surprised. I talked about ownership, how it means more than a title or a deed. It means peace, privacy, that sacred moment when you close the door and exhale. And how HOA politics had become a machine that eats that peace, one legal clause at a time. I didn't ask for applause, but I got it anyway. Not loud, just real. Later, as people filtered out, one older man approached me, said he used to be on the HOA board but left years ago when it stopped being about neighbors and started being about leverage. He shook my hand and said, "You reminded people they don't have to say yes to crazy." I didn't know what to say to that. So I just nodded. The lawsuit ended better than we expected. Karen took a plea deal, 13 years. Wire fraud, attempted bribery, falsification of documents, obstruction of justice, misuse of federal funds, the works. Her attorneys tried to frame it as a tragic fall from grace. The court didn't buy it. 2 more board members were indicted. 1 flipped. The HOA dissolved formally within a month. Its assets, the clubhouse, community vehicle, funds in reserve, were seized, pending redistribution to damaged parties. Me? I got my check, $500,000. But the real win came the day the new county zoning map was released. There it was, in full color. My land, once listed under Extended Development Overlay, Bristle Pines, now marked with a bold black line and the word excluded in capital letters. You bet your ass I printed it, framed it too. Right next to my front door, under a plaque that reads, "Not subject to HOA authority, ever." I updated the blog one last time. The cabin that fought back. I included photos, the investor packet with my stolen house on the cover, the drone Moose destroyed, the letter from Hood confirming the investigation's results. I ended it with a single line. Privacy is not a luxury. It's property, and it's worth defending. It got picked up nationally. Interview requests came in. NPR, Vice, even a streaming docuseries crew. I said no to most of it, except one podcast. The host let me rant for 20 minutes about the Constitution, real estate law, and why anyone trying to curate community optics can go pound sand. The cabin's quiet again. I've finished the manuscript I'd been struggling with when all this started. Working title, Trespassers Will Be Prosecuted. It's about a man who buys a home for solitude and finds himself in a war he never signed up for. Daryl says it'll sell like hell. I believe him. Moose still barks at SUVs. I still check the perimeter cams every night, not out of fear, out of principle, because now I know exactly how far people will go when you say no to the wrong empire. But I also know how fast that empire crumbles when you shine a light on the rot inside. And in the end, that's all it took. One word: no.